Hi, friends. It's your pal Scott Garibay, and today we are going to talk about a triumvirate of critically important tabletop role playing games and a major trend that has come to tabletop role playing games today. So, we're going to talk about Dungeons and Dragons, we're going to talk about Daggerheart, and we're going to talk about Draw Steel. So, these are pretty important right now. So, Dungeons and Dragons is Dungeons and Dragons. I don't need to tell you why Dungeons and Dragons is important because you already know it. The world knows it, right? But what's interesting is we have these two Dungeons and Dragons killer candidates who showed up. Both of these games were supposed to kill Dungeons and Dragons. They both were announced at exactly the same time, coming out of the OGL, the January 2023 OGL Fury period, right? And everybody's like, oh, Hasbro's done it now, man. They're never going to be able to sell Dungeons and Dragons again. Everybody's too angry, and it's just easy. We're going to all sweep it like three companies. Cobbled Press and MCDM and Critical Role, they're all creating D&D killers, and you could bet that a year or two from now, D&D will be dead, right? And here we are, right? And I'm talking about this right now because this is a critical moment, no pun intended, a crucial moment in Dungeons and Dragons history, where Dungeons and Dragons is very much not dead, and before our eyes, these D&D killer candidates are evaporating. Tales of Valiant is already done. Daggerheart is still in the mix. Draw Steel is pretty much finished, but it's important to look at it, right? And I do think people are going to look at this game. And so when we look at these three games, there are, well, D&D isn't a game, but when we look at Dungeons and Dragons and these two other games, I'd actually, you know what? I don't even think Daggerheart is a game because it's too marinated in Dungeons and Dragons. That's interesting. So when we look at these two tabletop role-playing game experiences and this one game, we see something really, a huge change in tabletop role-playing games that I think we need to talk about. Like, we've arrived at a distinct juncture, right? And this juncture is whenever anybody is designing a TTRPG, you have to, first of all, if you're just some schlumpty you're out there doing your thing and you don't know what you're doing and nobody's going to care about your game, I'm not talking about you. I'm talking about actual competitor candidates, D&D competitor candidates, right? And if you're designing, then you need to be aware of the current milieu, right? And the current milieu is the three-legged stool for every player character. What is that three-legged stool? Dungeons and Dragons, it's species, background, class. Okay? What is the equivalent in Daggerheart? It's ancestry, culture, and oh no, I think it's actually called background as well there. So it's ancestry, background, and class. Okay, and then in Draw Steel, it's ancestry, career, and culture, and then there are and they actually have two more in the mix. But there's now this thing where you're going to create backgrounds, you're going to create species or ancestries or heritages. You're never going to call it race again. No design. In fact, if you ever see a Dungeons and Dragons game that actually, if you ever see a tabletop role-playing game that uses the term race again, you could just ignore it, right? Because the people are completely ridiculously ignorant of the current standard and are regressive, right? Like, it's just, you could take, like, you could any TTRPG that's still using race, you could ignore that game. It's useless, right? Worse than useless. There you go. All right, okay. So now they do have an excuse if they were printed over 10 years ago and they haven't done a new edition. But who the heck is doing that? If you haven't done a new edition in 10 years, you're probably out of business. But yeah, all right. But this is really interesting. So you have, ancestry, career, culture. You have species, background, class. You have ancestry, background, class. Right, the three different games. And there's new rules for all of these, for these triple pod, these three-legged stools, right? So first of all, they're all interchangeable, right? Every species can go with every background and go with every class. There's no limitations, right? And that's the same across all three of these games. That's incredible. That is really incredible. And it marks a new arrival of a new, like, concrete reality in tabletop role-playing games. And that is, we do not impose limitations the way we did at the start, right? Like, in the beginning, if you were like, you know, elf, your species was literally your class and your background. Oh, you're an elf. We know exactly what you do. You're either a fighter or a wizard, and you're awesome at either one, and you're beautiful and tall. And we don't care what your background is, and we don't care what your class is. You're literally, that's all built into elf. What about human? Oh, they could be anything. Like, you will never see that again. You will never see that again, because we have really transitioned to this new era of tabletop role-playing games where these three-legged stools that are that player characters are now are completely interchangeable at every single one of these three axes, right? It's really something, and I think it's worth understanding that we've arrived here. And I think going forward, you're going to have a very difficult time writing something that opposes these old weird limits, right? And tries to go back to OSR 1.1e and 2e. And the reason why is those changes were born in regressiveness, right? I don't want to say prejudice, because it was the 70s and 80s. They didn't know what we know today. And I do think there was some prejudice and there was some hatred there. But generally, I think overall it was just ignorance. It was just ignorance, right? But now we're way too far out, right? Like, and basically, one of the things I think we are arriving at right now is we've arrived at this point where we are declaring that that limitations are on those three axes are prejudice or hatred. Like, it's just where we've arrived, and it's really fascinating. And I think it's really, just a critically important change that has, absolutely, it's a huge change in the market. Every single word you just heard in this video is my humble opinion, nothing more, nothing less. The important part is when I get to hear your humble opinion when you get in the comments and send your traffic. Please consider liking and subscribing, and have a fetch millennium.